I want to welcome you all here this morning. We're delighted to have you here. My name is Aziza Davis Goins, and I am the president and CEO for the Sacramento Black Chamber of Commerce. And we want to welcome you to hear some of our experts from our area in hopes that the information that they will impart today, you can take back to your respective homes and perhaps build your communities in ways that you might not have thought you'd be able to do. So we're delighted to have you all here with us today. You know, I do these fairly often, and I've been told, and I know it's true, that I'm a fairly informal kind of a speaker and moderator, so I want you to keep that in mind as we go ahead. One of the things that we will do so that our speakers don't run out of time is we're going to ask you to hold any questions until after they've all spoken. So if you have burning questions, be sure and write them down. And when we get to the Q&A at the end, then we'll have plenty of time to get those questions answered. So I want to begin by telling you a little bit about what we're doing here and the importance of this meeting. We all live in really very rich and diverse communities. I'm looking around the room and I can tell. But what the difference is that we don't always pool our resources and make our communities stronger. And this is one of the things that we are very concerned about in Sacramento, and I'm sure around the country and sometimes even around the world. We want to give you some ideas on how we can strengthen the fabric of our communities by pooling those resources together. A friend of mine who is in the back of the room now taking photos and I were at the museum yesterday, and we saw this theme running through the African American Museum of Culture and Art, that there was a time when the African American community pooled all of their resources and built beautiful communities and were self-reliant and self-sufficient. And we want to get back to that. And so we're hopeful that some of the information that you'll hear today will help you do that. Not only as a community member, but as an advocate for your community and also in the work that you do every single day. We've got to get back to that. We have some great speakers lined up. Just a second so I can tell you who they are. Our first speaker today, many of you may know him because he's everywhere all the time. William Jamal Miller is the Deputy Director of the California Department of Public Health in the Office of Health Equity. And he was appointed to this position by our governor, Jerry Brown, and is the state's lead advisor on issues relating to health and mental health disparities and achieving health equity for all Californians. He is responsible for overseeing the implementation of California's health equity strategy and guiding the work of a team whose reach extends across the state. He is rich in knowledge, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy hearing from him. Jamal Miller.
Good morning, everyone. That was like a big setup. She said, "Rich in knowledge." It's like like a scripture or something. It sounds like Solomon. Thank you so much. I'm truly glad to be here today, a part of a dynamic team of leaders within the greater Sacramento region. And I take great pride in being able to participate on this panel, particularly because I'm a native of Sacramento, California. And I think we are, as a region, one of the best kept secrets in the United States of America. And hopefully by the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll know why. I have the great pleasure of leading California's Office of Health Equity. And one of the key components of having healthy communities with regard to life expectancy and enhanced quality of life is sustainability. And in my presentation today is kind of a setup for the information that you're going to hear from the other panelists. You'll hear me talk a little bit about health, but really health is far more than just medicine. It's far more than just doctors. It's far more than just hospitals. It's about public safety. It's about strong economies. It's about a climate and an environment that is conducive to healthy and thriving living. So I'm going to set that up today and talk about what we do in the Office of Health Equity. And once again, just honored to be able to share with you. So the Office of Health Equity, our mission in the office is to promote equitable social, economic, and environmental conditions to achieve optimal health, mental health, and well-being. Health equity is a term that you probably hear often, and folks say, you lead California's Office of Health Equity, or like, do you finance health care, or do you manage a hedge fund? I'm like, no. Health equity is defined as it's the efforts to ensure that all people have full and equal access to opportunities that enable them to lead healthy lives. And the reason why I like to take time out to define what it means is so that we can level set and be on the same page when you hear health equity. So the text, Dr. Janine and I were texting last week, and she's like, Jamal, next time you do your presentation, make your fonts a little bit bigger. And I didn't get a chance to do that on this one. But so historically, to set this up, this is my definition slide. And historically, the Federal Office of Minority Health was created over 30 years ago. And minority health is synonymous with health equity. However, minority health can be seen pejoratively with regard to othering and making health disparities something that exclusively relates to people of color. But at any given time, all of us can be subjected to health and mental health inequities. And I often do an exercise when I present to let everyone know that at any given time we can be most vulnerable. And I want to demonstrate that to you. So if you hear your group, like when you get a chance, we'll make sure this presentation is made available to you later, but I want to read the vulnerable communities definition to you, because oftentimes, whether it's the most conservative of people that are in the Republican Party, or people who may live in a community where they believe that minority health issues or health disparities is not related to them, I read this definition and typically everyone's hand is raised, because we're all at any given time subjected to health and mental health inequity. So if you hear your group, raise your hand. If you hear like multiple groups that you belong to, raise both hands. And if you hear like more than two, like you might want to stand. So vulnerable communities. Vulnerable communities include but are not limited to women, raise your hand, racial or ethnic groups, low-income individuals and families, individuals with mental health conditions, children, youth and young adults, seniors, immigrants, and refugees, individuals who are limited English proficient, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning communities, or combinations, any of these. All right, we got some folks standing, so applaud yourselves. And my purpose for sharing this particular definition is, once again, this is all inclusive. So when we talk about what sustainability means, and when we talk about promoting and achieving health and mental health equity, we're inextricably linked with regard to our ability to get there. So healthcare, by 2025, we're going to spend almost 20% of our GDP on healthcare. Currently, it's 17.8%, to the tune of trillions of dollars that we're investing in healthcare. But I would propose that investing in social services, investing in our economy, investing into innovation and other facets of our lives naturally enhances our life quality and life expectancy. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you. We have a very inefficient healthcare system, particularly because we're dumping so much into a broken system of health. And when we talk about sustainability, if we're going to invest more and more in social services, that is going to be the key to having thriving and healthy communities. There's a study that was produced a few years ago, the Joint Center on Political and Economic Studies, across the span of 2003 to 2006. Healthcare inequality cost the United States of America $1.24 trillion. And when you think about the direct medical expenditures associated with health inequality for African American Asian American, and Latinos is roughly $300 billion directly in direct medical expenses. So when someone contends that health inequity is irrelevant, we should not be concerned with it, I can show you an economic stimulus package as to why we need to address health inequality, because it's very, very costly when we think about who is disproportionately impacted from a human cost, but particularly economically. And at the root of many of the disparities and inequities that exist when we talk about racism, particularly institutional and structural racism, the history of our country, when we think about slavery, when we think about indigenous peoples being massacred and having genocide, at the root of many of the disparities that we're going to talk about today is race. And we have to get very comfortable in understanding the context and the history of our country, because in order for us to have thriving and sustainable communities, we have to have very real and transparent conversations. And I'm not going to be very political today in my presentation. However, what is going on nationally from a political standpoint is making it far more explicit as to why we need to directly address racism, structural and institutional racism in our communities, because at the root of many of the disparities that we're talking about across environmental disparities, economic disparities, health disparities, mental health disparities and such, at the root of it is racism. It's our class-oriented issues, and we have to get very comfortable with talking about those issues. And what happens when you're subjected to racism and discrimination? There are very real physiological and biological dynamics to where racism and discrimination affects us. So this slide demonstrates across the various disparities, just think of all of us who could be vulnerable at any time. If you're subjected to sexism, racism, discrimination, not only is it going to disturb you psychologically or emotionally, but physically it has an effect on you. So if we look in the middle here, racism and discrimination, it leads to what? Chronic stress. It's perpetual. Even though, like, you look at me, this brother has a decent suit on, he seems to have it together, but being a black man who leads the California Office of Health Equity and the State Department of Public Health, or being the chief of police, or being the chief innovation officer, or being the chief medical officer at WellSpace, we all have a unique load and burden that we carry, and we look good. But believe me, we are chronically stressed out. So what happens over time when you bear that allostatic load? Epigenetic changes, intergenerational dynamics, increased allostatic load. And then you wonder, where does health inequity manifest itself? Cancer and heart disease and high blood pressure. And it leads to slides like this, where African Americans are at the top of every bad list, almost every, and at the bottom of many of the good lists. And we want to flip that. We want to flip that. And the key for us to do that is to be, once again, very real and talk about what some of the challenges are that are perplexing us uniquely. California, we talk about the various social determinants of health. One of the key social determinants of health is food and nutrition. Food insecurity, believe it or not, is one of the major issues that we deal with in California. And it's very ironic because we're literally like the breadbasket of the world. Agriculture is one of our leading economies. But 1 in 4 children in California does not have enough food. And if you look at county-based comparisons, place-based comparisons, when we talk about the key to having sustainable communities, how sustainable you are often is indicated by, let's look at income. Let's look at, once again, child food insecurity rates when you compare those. Let's look at poverty, and let's look at the demographic makeup of many of these communities and early childhood development and graduation rates. All of these key indicators are going to respond rhetorically or literally to the question of how are we doing as a community and as a state, as a city, with regard to addressing health inequality and being sustainable. Public safety, crime, violence, when we once again think about other social determinants of health, these are geospatial comparisons. The pink in particular, those are like the highest rated communities when we think about crime. This happens to be Southern California, but take a community like this, the hot spots that are pink. This happens to be crime, but let's think about asthma rates. Let's think about poverty. Let's think about dropouts. Let's think about many of the major social indicators that we often review and have discussions about. It's the same communities. So if I gave you a bag and I put one heavy rock in it, your arms might be strong enough, but if I keep putting the same pressures on you in your community, you're going to give in and ultimately be broken down by many of these inequities and disparities that exist. And in order for us to have sustainable communities, and Chief Hahn will talk about it later, we have to address issues when we think about public safety. Climate change. Some would contend that climate change is not real. I'm here to share with you it is. One of the teams that we have in our Office of Health Equity is our Climate Change and Health Equity team. And once again, when we think about who's most vulnerable, looking at this slide on the left, once again, the font may be small, but the dark blue on the left, these are where some of the most diverse communities are. People of color happen to reside in these areas, in this corridor of California. On the right side is air particulate, which just so happens to overlay with some of the most diverse communities of color. Once again, sharing with you, when we think about sustainability and the issues that need to be addressed, climate change, global warming needs to be a key component of the conversations that we're having. And then lastly, oftentimes we don't talk about politics and civic engagement as a key social determinant of health, as a key component of sustainability. To summarize, this Black Lives Matter study that was done in 2015 by Dr. Javier Rodriguez, this essentially says that from 1970 to 2004, there were 1.7 million deaths in the African American community due to health disparities. If those 1.7 people had been around in 2004 and voted in the 2004 election, John Kerry would have been our president instead of George Bush. So just think about that. 7 gubernatorial races would have been flipped in 2004, and 11 state senate races would have been flipped. So when we think about the importance of political incorporation, civic engagement, and why is that important when we think about sustainability and health? Because when we're electing people to represent us, to serve us, or people are being appointed to serve us, going back to that slide, we spend 17.8% of our GDP on health, right? So most of the decisions that are made around health and human services, social services, infrastructure, they're made by people that we elect to office. So the last I heard, unhealthy and dead people don't vote and aren't active. But if we activate ourselves from a political engagement standpoint, we can truly transform and foster sustainable communities. And I would also contend, when you hear like voting suppression and some of the others, or repealing Obamacare, for instance, there's strategy behind that, because once again, unhealthy communities don't vote, dead people don't vote. So we have to be very, very wise and strategic in understanding that the game is much larger than just simply repealing Obamacare or suppressing people's ability to vote. So as I wrap up, this public health framework, and this is probably my favorite slide of this entire deck, because what you're going to hear today, from downstream to upstream, this is the path by which we achieve health equity and sustainability. Downstream, we're very familiar with us dying sooner than others, and we're very familiar with the diseases that perplex our community and risky behaviors. But today you're going to hear so much more about the importance of living conditions and the environment, more about institutional inequities and what we need to do to transform that, and ultimately social inequities. So this public health framework really provides that spectrum of how we have healthy and sustainable communities. We know that health is wealth. Income plays a key role in our health. There's uneven distribution. An example here is that we have 2% of African Americans in California. Let me flip that. 6% of people in California are African American. However, we have 2% of the wealth in California. And there's a huge disparity in wealth. And once again, health is wealth. Marin County just so happens to be the wealthiest county in the United States of America. And guess what? They have one of the highest life expectancies in the United States of America as well. Tells a different story if you look at Marin City, but that's a whole different conversation. So this is our statewide presentation, our strategic plan. I'm glad to say our senior strategist from our Office of Health Equity is here, Dr. Tamu Nofel. What I love about This particular statewide plan is, once again, at the core of it is sustainability. It breaks out and talks about the various social, economic, environmental components of having a healthy existence. So I would suggest that you go check this out. And this is how we get to having sustainable communities and achieving equity at every level. Healthy people leads to healthy community. Healthy communities come from healthy environment, and at the foundation of it is a healthy society. So this is where we want to go. This is very aspirational. Equality is very different from equity. And the reality is some of us are starting a few steps down. But I believe today we will all be sustainability ambassadors, and we'll be on the same path, on the path towards getting to equity. So I will wrap up there, and I will hand the baton off to Aziza to introduce our next presenter.
Thank you so much, Jamal. Testing. Oh, that's better. Rather than jumping up and down, I'll just announce our speakers from here. Our next speaker is Dr. Janine Barra. She recently became the Chief Medical Officer of WellSpace Health. WellSpace Health. Say that fast 3 times. And she's working towards fulfilling their mission to achieve regional health through high-quality, comprehensive care. WellSpace aims to establish a blanket of care. Again, we're talking sustainability, looking at the whole picture. Dr. Barra completed her internal medicine residency at the University of California, Davis. She worked at Kaiser Permanente for about 15 years before going to WellSpace. Janine stays active in the community by giving education talks on many health and lifestyle topics such as diabetes and heart disease, eating and exercise. And in full disclosure, she's married to Congressman Ami Bera. We have to tell her that. Congressman Bera's congressman from our great state of California. Without further ado, Dr. Janine.
Thank you. Well, I am very honored to be here with you this morning to share some of this information. And Jamal, you really led it off good because there is a lot of kind of doom and gloom and despair. And every time I prepare one of these talks, I'm struck by it again. And however, I always try to talk about something, maybe a little brighter, things that we are doing. And so I'm going to share with you some policies that are working, some that aren't working, and some different programs that we have in Sacramento that are making a difference in our community. I've lived in Sacramento for over 20 years, and although I'm from Southern California, Sacramento is my home, and I love our community, and that's why I'm really happy, again, to be here to share this with you today. So here's a slide that I've been showing for many years, and it almost doesn't really matter the year because anytime I go to pull it, it looks the same. And the second column in is African Americans. We die of everything more. These are the top 3 causes of death: heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And we're the highest in all of them. Now, this slide also, again, says heart disease is number 1, cancer, homicide, diabetes, and perinatal. However, the yellow that you see shows you things that are actually positive about being African American that we don't die from. So we were joking a little bit earlier, we might go out and kill you, but we're not going to kill ourselves. We don't commit suicide, which is really interesting. Now, what is at the root cause of a lot of this? This is what we think about in medicine. What can we do to make a difference? And if you look here, here's a chart that many of you may have seen before, and it starts back in 1994 on the right side, and it looks at obesity rates and diabetes. So what happens is when someone is overweight, they're more likely to get diabetes. And why that matters is because when you get diabetes, I always would describe it in primary care as that is what slowly causes the destruction in your body on a cellular level. That blood sugar floating through your bloodstream, it rusts your pipes, it punches holes in your nervous system, so then you end up with diabetic nerve disease, blindness, and because it's also bothering your bloodstream, it also raises your blood pressure and makes you more likely to have a heart attack or a stroke. So it is what is the basis of the reason why heart disease is such a big killer. But the best thing about it is that you have a lot of power to slow that down if you start with thinking about pre-diabetes, which is a diagnosis that you have before you even get diabetes, to give you an opportunity to make some lifestyle changes. Because then when you make those lifestyle changes, you slow down what I often describe as diabetes is like a train. And when you get that pre-diabetes diagnosis or that diabetic diagnosis, that train has left the station. You, however, are the conductor, so you're the one who can decide how fast is that train gonna go to destroying my body. Is it gonna go super fast so I'm gonna die of a heart attack within 5 years? Or am I gonna take control by changing my diet, exercising, getting that weight off so that then my train will slow down? So that's the link here. And it just shows you that although for some people it is genetic, and it is in my family, but you have a lot of power to slow this down. So that's why when you look at some of the policies that have come up when you're talking about obesity in the communities, there's the calories on menus. How many people, those came out, I believe it was in 2012, I think, around there. How many people still look at those? It changed my behavior initially. I used to like to go, well, I still will go there, to BJ's. And I always would get this salad because salad is good, right? And it's healthy. I'm not getting the pizza. Wasn't eating the pizookie. That's the giant cookie with the ice cream. But so I would get this salmon salad, and it was a nice size salad, and it was, dripping in dressing, and it had this giant piece of salmon on it, and I felt very good about myself when I would order that, because then if I ate that, then I could have a pizookie. But if I got a pizza, then no pizookie. However, when they put the calories on the menu, that salad was more calories than eating a personal pizza. There's many, and that made me very sad because you try so hard, and I know people think about this, but there is a lot in there. Just briefly, there's portion control. The salmon piece was this big. It was coated in dressing, and yeah, I would eat all of it and then still eat the pizookie, but it was delicious. However, we have to think about a lot. Not only what are our healthy choices, but things like put dressing on the side, eat half of it, all those things. But putting the calories on the menus, this is what they've seen is that it did initially, and sometimes it makes you think about ordering something different, but after a while we stop seeing it. Then there's the soda tax that was enacted in Philadelphia and Berkeley, and it has had a decrease in the consumption of sodas. We don't know yet because that was just in 2015 in Berkeley and 2017 in Philadelphia, so we don't know yet quite what impact this might have, but it has decreased the consumption of soda. And then the snack food tax, that's another one, the same thing. You're gonna snack your chips, your cookies. This one hasn't been enacted yet, but I think it's a novel idea because the cigarette tax actually is working. The cigarette tax has really cut down the numbers of smokings in all age groups, which is very powerful. And then also with the cigarette tax, you can fund other programs. That's the nice thing. A lot of times you take the tax from these programs and you put them to other things. Like the cigarette tax goes to fund First Five, which funds one of the programs I'm going to share with you in a little bit that is changing lives. So we're taking something that's negative and then turning it into a positive. So this slide right here is showing about the number of calories that we consume in the African American community. at age 2 to 19 and 20 and over, and I put our arrows over how much soda we drink, sugary drinks, in the amount of calories. So we are drinking more. And that means if you live in Berkeley or Philadelphia, you're spending more for those. And these are smoking trends that shows that the cigarette tax is working to decrease the smoking. And you can see African Americans smoke less than other people. So that's positive as well. So now I'm going to move on to cancer. And the cancers that we screen for are cancers that really we have treatment for. And so that's breast, colon, and cervical. We don't screen for pancreatic cancer or brain cancer because we don't have great treatments. And they're also not quite as common as breast, colon, and cervical. Now, with breast cancer, that used to be thought to be a disease of white women. However, starting in 2009, between 2012, this chart shows African Americans are the red line. It's starting to equal the rates of white women. Now, that is thought to be due to something that, again, we can make a difference in, and that's screening. Finding it early, getting treated early, and then access to care is another issue because if you are diagnosed, a lot of times it is later in the game and the treatment is not as good for African American women. And that is showing that difference there. That's a very busy slide. Jamal's probably going to send me a text that I should. But what this is looking at is the orange is the number of cervical cancer in our community in the United States, and then the deaths, so is the highest rate. Now that is, to me, one of the saddest ones. Now, because if you find this early, the pap smear allows you to actually find cancerous changes in the cells before it's actually cancer. It's you see those early changes, but you have to get that pap smear. Now, when I used to work at Kaiser, and what we're also starting to have at WellSpace are where we have Saturday clinics that you can come in. At Kaiser, we could walk you downstairs. If you came in to say for a blood pressure check, then we'd say, oh, why don't you go downstairs and get your pap smear? The problem is women don't want to do it. It's uncomfortable. I'm not ready. I'm not doing that today. So those are the things that we hear, but it's simple, and usually whoever is doing your pap smear really could care less if you took a shower. What is most important is that you get this test done, again, because in a way I feel like the fact that we die of a treatable, preventable cancer that is so simple is just really, really sad. So please get your pap smears regularly. The recommendation is every 3 years if you have had a normal test before. It is more frequent if you ever had an abnormal test, but that's decided individually for women. And it's the same thing for mammograms. We move the age from 40 to 50 to begin screening unless you have a family history. And then now it's every 2 to 3 years is the recommendation. And the reason for that is we think there might be, and I don't mean to scare you, but cumulative risk of radiation over a lifetime to cause other cancers. So that's why we spread it out. However, breast cancer, like cervical cancer, if caught early, is easily treated. Now, here's a bright spot, colorectal cancer. So it's still bad for Black people. Again, the testing and the dying from it. However, it's going down. Now, colon cancer screening. Colon cancer screening is a little bit, has changed. And now we use the FIT test. How many people have ever done a FIT test? You've got anyone? Just one hand back there, one over here. So it's done when you're 50 or older, so I don't mean to call you out as old. You no longer have to do a colonoscopy. You just take these cards home, and it's gross. You have to stick a little stick in your poop, smear on a card, mail it in. If that is positive, because this is so sensitive for blood, then you do a colonoscopy. And you do this test every year. So people are starting to get tested now for this in a greater number. And I did have a patient he was a gentleman, African American, about 67 years old, and he came in for his physical. And I said, you really need to do your colon cancer screening. And he's like, I'm not doing a colonoscopy, right? Because a colonoscopy, you have to have this large tubes put in your private, and that's kind of uncomfortable. I said, but now we have this other test. Well, he did this test, and then he found out that was positive, and we found his colon cancer when it was a tiny polyp. So all that he had to have done was to snip that off and then come back and repeat a colonoscopy in a year and then 3 years, and then it spreads out. Rather than not knowing, and now that tiny polyp has now spread all over, and now we're talking complete removal of the colon, or a section of it. So that's the power of this. This gentleman is off golfing, having a great time, and his life expectancy hasn't been diminished at all. He may not be able to sit down quite often after the colonoscopy, but that's the only side effect. Now, what do we do about this? Now, so the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act does increase access to care, and it should be supported. It is not perfect, but it is a beginning, and we are working out the kinks in it, but to remove it entirely removes this patient that I was very proud of to actually share with President Obama when I met with him, that I had a patient. She's a nice woman. She worked in a nonprofit, which meant that she didn't have health insurance. This woman was 52 years old. She had diabetes. She had a problem with her thyroid, and worse, she had a very large skin cancer on her face. One of those ones that looks like that you're not sure if it's a cancer, but you're not sure, it is like a wicked witch mole. And so she just had it there, and it was getting bigger and bigger, she said. And she was taking her medications occasionally, but she would spread them out because she couldn't afford to pay for her medications. But with the Affordable Care Act, now she could come in and see me as her primary care doctor. We could get her diabetic medications, get her thyroid medication, and get this skin cancer cut off her face before it really started to cause her problems. And that was the power of access to care. We need to increase each and every person's ability to see a doctor. That was the colon cancer slide I was looking for a minute ago. So now I'm going to talk about something else that is pretty devastating. And that is that black babies die 2 to 3 more times than other babies. 2 to 3 more times. So that means that out of 100,000 births, 83 black babies die, compared to about 34 of any other race. There's many reasons for this, and things like co-sleeping, inadequate nutrition that Jamal talked about, not getting good prenatal care because of not having access to hospitals and doctors, and the list goes on. In Sacramento, that was funded by First Five, we have the Cultural Broker Program. The Cultural Broker Program not only has home visitations for pregnant women where they go out and assess their home and help them with their nutrition, connect them in with other social services, and talk to them at a level they can understand, because they also talk about co-sleeping, because that's when you sleep with your baby, and then what happens is you're so tired as a mom, you don't mean to, but you do roll over on your baby and you don't know it, or you somehow move the blanket and then the baby's smothered. It's also because of low birth weights. A baby that is born either too early or is too tiny is more likely to die. So in the Cultural Broker Program, not only do we address a lot of the social issues around it, we also do another thing. With Medi-Cal, what is covered is there can be an ultrasound to look at what is going on with the baby early on in the first trimester, and then again at 20 weeks. However, in African American women of no matter what the socioeconomic status of this woman, at 24 weeks, the cervix might start to thin. And when the cervix starts to thin, flatten out, that's when the baby's going to be delivered. The earlier this starts to happen, and so 24 weeks, we can get in and the OB can make an intervention like bed rest, or actually for some women, you can do a cerclage, which is, it sounds drastic, but it saves the baby and saves the mom, is to sew the cervix closed so that babies are more likely to go to term. And when they're more likely to go to term, then you have fewer low birth weight babies, which means lower infant death. This is working. And this is what we do in our cultural broker program. Again, it was funded by First Five, which was funded by the cigarette tax. So that is very hopeful that we can do all these things, and then we can have this additional ultrasound as part of this program. Is that in this program, since its inception in 2015, we've had no deaths. We've had no low birth weights, except for twins, which are traditionally lower birth weight. We had 7 sets of twins. But that was in the past 2 years, and we're going to our 3rd year. So programs like these work. Almost done. Those are just graphs showing it, and that's the Cultural Broker program. So one more thing that kind of ties into what the rest of our speakers are going to talk about is ACEs, and that's adverse childhood experiences. And this is where if you are a victim of abuse or malnutrition or any kind of mistreatment when you're younger, you are more likely to then torture other people when you get older. You repeat these behaviors. And this is a newer field of study, but it's really trying to look at what might we do to break that cycle. Obviously, you can't go back in time to someone and remove an adverse event, but a lot of times those events, they weren't talked about, or things would be said like someone who was, say, a child molester, oh, well, that's just what she does. It was accepted, but we're starting to say, no, that's not accepted, and we're trying to loop back. So there's a great program in Sacramento because adverse childhood experiences also increases the likelihood of diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, because it is stress, and stress is also what contributes to this. So when you're constantly at a higher level of stress, that also contributes to this. But there's a program in Sacramento, it's the Brother to Brother program, and it's really grassroots. It takes a lot of the men who have been imprisoned, either drug dealers or gang members, and a lot of times when they start to open up, they report how they were mistreated when they were children. So we have those men going back to talk to young men about how to break that cycle, so that they don't grow up to perpetuate this behavior. And so this program is starting to make a true difference in our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Janine. It's a wealth of information. And I hope that you're writing down your questions so that you will have those at the end of our session so that you can speak to Dr. Barra and or to Jamal and our other speakers and get more clarification on things that they're presenting. So we're going to move along, and we're going to talk a little bit now about another aspect of community and sustainability that we haven't talked about yet, and that's a very important piece, economic development. There is nothing that's going to happen without a good, robust economic development piece within your community. And for that, we have Lewis Stewart with us today, who currently serves as the City of Sacramento's first Chief Innovation Officer within the Mayor's Office for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Mr. Stewart is responsible for the development of a broad citywide portfolio of programs and initiatives that support drive, influence, and build upon the City of Sacramento's economic inclusion philosophy. Louis?
Thank you. All right, thank you, Aziza. Actually, thanks for inviting me to even be here. And I'm not going to stand at the podium because I have height issues. Most microphones don't tend to pick me up. So, and to speak to Jamal's point about we all have stressful situations going on. What Aziza just read is causing me great stress. And somebody pointed out how many more gray hairs I actually have when I let my beard grow out for No Shave November to support the promotion of colon cancer screening. Anyway, so with all that said, now the big stress of public speaking. So real quick today, just I'm gonna give you a quick overview of how I even came into the spot for the city. But then just a little bit about where Black business is today. Look at how we can actually do a better job workforce development. And for all you guys that have kids in here, drag your kids places like this so they can actually meet folks like you and others. Like I do my kids. My kids are annoyed with me because I take them everywhere. But at the end of the day, when my 12-year-old son looks at me and says he doesn't want to get an autonomous car because they can get hacked and they can drive him into the ocean, I know he's actually listening to something. So real quick, just a quick intro to me and what I do, a few numbers, and then we'll go from there. Is it possible to get that side off so we can open it up all the way, or no? No? Okay, fantastic. So look, I came into this spot essentially being unemployed. So back in 2006, I applied to a Craigslist ad for a junior web developer. Walked into the interview that I got a call for 2 hours later, and essentially got hired as a statewide IT director for Arnold Schwarzenegger's re-election campaign for being unemployed. And so that jump-started my civil service career, and I ended up serving under two governors, Schwarzenegger and Brown, the last 7 years as essentially a chief innovation officer for the state of California. So a lot of what you see on this screen about the iHub program is a program that started slightly before me by another African-American, Del Bonner, and it was my job to grow it. And as a single person in the state ecosystem with no staff, that's me traveling around all those areas around the state, trying to work with universities, trying to work with industry, trying to work with government to get them to understand the ecosystem that existed, but why people of color needed to be included into that ecosystem. Because a lot of times when I walked into rooms, I was the only me. So that's a complete different level of stress when you finally feel that weight when you walk into a room. So the iHub program, 16 innovation ecosystems around the state. I'm sure there's more. The regional part of it is the important piece. It's built around the triple helix. So as government, industry, and academia working together to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in an ecosystem. And now I have the opportunity to step into an office that Mayor Kevin Johnson started called the Mayor's Office for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And it's this on speed, because now I'm closer to the core. Whereas when in the governor's office, I was a few steps removed from the governor. So, if I got to see him, great. But, for the most part, I tried to stay out of the Capitol, and it was good. Now I'm actually in City Hall. The mayor has been texting me this morning because just like every other mayor in the U.S., he wants to compete for the Amazon headquarters. And so, and I'm not in Sacramento right now. So that's a complete different level of stress again. Look, by the numbers, minority businesses only make up 14.6% of all business in the U.S. And the Small Business Administration says that blacks account for 7.3 of those businesses. So it's 1 in 14 business owners. And that goes back to me walking into rooms, being the only me. Imagine traveling the state, seeing all this innovation, all this entrepreneurship, all this creativity happening at the university level, and somebody from a company walking up to me saying, I know this is over your head, but we just kind of go with it. To which I turned around in front of her boss and said, look, I wanted to be a chemical engineer when I went to Santa Clara University. My coaches, however, decided that I was not going to be, so they dissuaded me from doing that. Yes, I have a studio art degree, but that doesn't mean that I don't understand what these scientists are saying. So that right there is important context, because if you have 220 minority-owned businesses that opened up in California in 2015, and I didn't see one in all of my visits, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. But that's, again, why you take your kids to all this stuff, so they start to understand how to assimilate. They understand what's out there. Access and awareness is key. I guess I should do both at the same time. So right now is prime opportunity. And I was talking to some folks earlier. It may be a little too late, but it's still at the beginning. There's a paradigm shift happening where back in the 60s, manufacturing was the go-to job, especially for the black community. You walk in, you knew somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody, you got a job in manufacturing, building cars, steel, whatever it was. That was 27% of all jobs were manufacturing jobs. In early 2015, that number shifted downward to 13%. So that means that low educated, low income earners aren't being able to walk into a factory anymore. But with STEM-based manufacturing jobs, you actually have the ability for minority business owners to step into a different kind of business, a different kind of paradigm. Not necessarily only being a retail outlet or a construction outlet. Not that there's not anything wrong with those, but understand that there's a complete shift happening, complete paradigm that's changing. I'm out talking about autonomous vehicles. I'm out talking about advanced transportation systems, Internet of Things, which is the connected of everything. So I'm picturing how Sacramento can be one of the most connected cities in the US, if not the world. And the reason why Sacramento is important in that is because we're the capital of the sixth largest economy. So if we're not talking about it, it's going to happen without Sacramento, which means a lot of the legislators aren't going to necessarily know what happens, or they're going to come to Sacramento with their own agenda for their own communities. And so me being in the position I am, being able to walk into these rooms because of the resources, it's a great opportunity. And so I'm honored to be here today in front of all of you. Emerging markets require the people, or could require our people and our companies to be more agile and more adaptable. And those are traits that our communities of color have shown for years. And if we don't step into that strength now, we're going to get left behind again. And we're going to be trying to figure out, why are these self-driving car companies doing all this? And again, we're just the consumer, as opposed to being in there. We have our kids in coding academies, but do they understand how those coding academies lead to programming for cars? Do those kids understand how coding academies can lead to cyber, which protects the hacking of cars that drive you into the ocean? You actually have to start connecting the dots. There's a need for us to embrace these new realities so that we aren't left behind again. I spoke about my son, that's him playing video games on the bottom corner. But I took him to one of the companies that we funded through our Rapid Acceleration Innovation and Leadership in Sacramento program. And this company is actually essentially a warehouse for game producers. So the gentleman that he's talking to produced a game, and he was sitting there playing it. And my son's standing there drooling, trying to figure out, how he can get his hands on the controller. And so he finally did. And for the next 20 minutes, I listened to the game maker trip out over how my son's brain worked, because he was doing stuff in the game that he, as the designer and creator, had never seen before, and invited him actually to come back and test other games. I didn't put a picture of my daughter because I only had half of her head, and she wouldn't approve of that picture. So, but she did basically the same thing. But what you see in these pictures is what I'm doing now. I'm out communicating, I'm out connecting, I'm out collaborating, I'm out coordinating. And yeah, there's all these stats out there about 38 to 50% of job displacement is going to happen because of automation. But you also have to look at the fact that right now is a prime time to set up programs and policies that are going to actually get you back into the workforce on the front end, as opposed to trying to figure out 15 years down the line how you got left out again. And so proactively in Sacramento, starting to connect a lot of these programs together. Top right-hand picture is a Square Root Academy, led by two brothers out of Sacramento. One came out of, one was an engineer at Boeing. I forgot where the other guy was from, but one of their biggest challenges, successful program, but one of their biggest challenges is getting kids to the program. So I need to connect them to the programmers and so on and so forth, because they're teaching kids STEM, but again, there's no pathway for them to see what's next. So I talked to them about connecting to the guy at the bottom so that those kids can actually go start testing video games with all the video game programmers, because they all love video games. So it's just a matter of trying to figure out how to connect. In the bottom left-hand corner, I'm part, the one board that I'm truly active in is the California Airshow Board. It's really promoting STEAM for future pilots and getting kids into aviation. So we're sitting there with a couple pilots, parachutists, speaking to a black charter school in Sacramento, and having them ask a bunch of questions about jumping out of planes, flying planes, and so on and so forth, to get them to see that there's other careers out there besides sports. Basketball afforded me a lot, but it actually opened the doors that I have now. But I always tell people I need an extra inch and a half, and I'd had a different career. When I stand up, you guys will laugh at that one. So, look, right now, you heard Jamal, you heard Dr. Berra. There's a lot of big problems out there, huge problems. And my approach to what I do, and I hope you guys take something away from this, is you got to start small. You got to start with a piece. If you try to take on the big problem and you haven't done the foundational stuff to get our community into those conversations, a lot of times that's when people are able to dismiss the fact that you're even in the conversation in the first part. So by doing the connecting and collaborating and communicating, that's actually what led me to a partnership that I'm working on with Dr. Berra around moms and babies. So my whole fascination with transportation these days, because I started hearing stories about people not being able to get to their visits at the doctor's office, talk about the kids not being able to get to STEM programming. My kids running late one morning when I had a flat tire, so I just threw them in an Uber. But I didn't know the driver. But if I could have called an autonomous car to come get my kids, I'd have gladly put them in there to get to school. I put them in the Uber. But that's just because I needed to get them to school on time. But if you start thinking ahead and you start really truly looking at what's coming, if you start working with folks and develop use cases that actually serve as proof points for what our community is capable of and how to actually help our community, and you then put those on the table to your legislators, to your politicians, to your other businesses, and you start showing the way that our people actually, as a diverse and dynamic group of people, can actually ideate in a completely different way. And inclusive economic development, inclusive innovation ecosystems isn't just a buzzword. We are a completely untapped resource in my mind. If those 8 million minority-owned businesses that are out there, all of a sudden we're able to employ one other person, and that person was hired, a young kid who's sitting on Twitter and Facebook putting up nonsense, now all of a sudden is doing that for a business, and that business is then able to increase capacity and earnings and hire more people from there. Just imagine the impact that we can all have if we actually started shifting just that one little thing. And so, they told me that self-deprecation was good. So that's me at 3. And, I want to thank you guys for listening to this. Like I said, I'm not coming from a place, I'm not an engineer. I wanted to be one. I am studio art major, emphasis on sculpture and ceramics, who happen to play basketball good enough to get a scholarship to the university. Grew up overseas. And that was me right before I left to go live in France and learn French and learn Italian and see things that most of us as kids don't necessarily think that we're going to see. And so I sit before you today asking you to introduce your kids to this, talk to each other in a completely different way. Don't dismiss any ideas, because ideas start off as a whisper. And oftentimes when you dismiss those whispers, that's when you get left behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Louis. I much appreciate it. So You know, we talk a little bit about the importance of healthcare and economic development, but our communities wouldn't serve us well without energy. And our next speaker is going to speak to that very point. Ted Green leads SMUD, and SMUD is the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And while this looks very Sacramento centric, everything that we're talking about here can be applied to the communities in which you live. So don't think it's just about Sacramento. It really is about our communities and the communities that we hold dear to ourselves. Take this information back and enhance it in the communities in which you live and work and play. So Ted leads SMUD's strategic efforts to meet the needs of small and mid-sized business community. His team is responsible for providing customers customized programs and services to over 26,000 commercial customers. Ted, every time I read this, I'm floored. But he has over 35 years of utility experience, including time spent in key account management, energy efficiency programs and services, and nuclear generation. He doesn't even look 35, does he? Oh, see? Without further ado, Ted Green.
Thank you so much. I am going to stand here at the podium because, like Lewis, I am height challenged too. And I know the microphones almost don't pick me up, so let me know if you can't hear me. I know this 5'8" can be very imposing, so. I'm just getting off of an airplane from Asia, and so I have the luxury of my presentation going sideways because I've had 10 cups of coffee already this morning, so. But I'm glad to be part of this panel. I'm also glad to be a member of SMUD. A little about us. SMUD's the nation's 6th largest community-owned electric utility. We serve a little over 600,000 customers and a population of about 1.5 million. And this year, we're celebrating our 70th anniversary. And one of my colleagues mentioned to me not long ago, he goes, "Man, Ted, you know, you've been around for half of that." Like, yeah, thank you very much. Our service territory encompasses about 900 square miles, and we're governed by a 7-member board of directors that determines our policy and appoints our CEO, who's responsible for SMUD's daily operations. We've been California's top-rated electric utility in the J.D. Power Residential Customer Satisfaction Survey for 16 years in a row. Let me say that again, 16 years in a row. It's hard to be the best at anything for over a year, but we've been there for 16. SMUD's rates are among the lowest in the state. We're approximately 30% lower than our neighboring utility, Pacific Gas and Electric. We were the first large California utility to have over 20% of our power come from renewable resources, and we're on track to exceed that by 40% by 2020. If you include our hydroelectric generation and purchases, more than 50% of our power comes from carbon neutral sources. And I'll tell you why that's important. When I started at the utility, our principal power generation facility was Rancho Seco, a nuclear generating facility. And when I started at the utility, see this gentleman here in front of the camera, there in the black suit with that head of hair? That's what I look like. And then I went to work at a nuclear power plant. And now this is what I look like. Economic development. We at SMUD absolutely believe in economic development. We're promoting economic vitality of the region and the growth of our customer base because this is one of our key values. It's one of the key values of our board of directors. And this means that we promote rate affordability, We align our activities with the regional economic development initiatives going on with other local partners. We assist in the retention and the recruitment and the growing of commercial and industrial businesses. We offer rate economic development incentives. And we have a contracting program for certified small businesses through our Supplier Education and Economic Development team. We affectionately call that SEED. In 2016, SMUD awarded nearly 23% of our contracts to SEED certified small businesses, exceeding our own goal of 20%. The 327 SEED contracts awarded in 2016 totaled more than $41 million. So far, at the midway point of this year, over 23% of SMUD contracts had gone to SEED businesses, with an amount totaling over $25 million. Helping those in need. Another core fundamental issue at SMUD is helping those in need. Earlier this year, the SMUD Board of Directors approved a rate change for what we call our EPR strategy. EPR is our Energy Assistance Program rate for those in need, for low-income customers. It makes electricity more affordable for qualified low-income customers by providing discounts on their monthly bills. Historically, our EPR eligibility has been based on income, and the size of the discount was based on how much energy you use at your home. We re-examined the discount rate with the goal of better aligning our customers who need the most help. The changes in this program help to better align the services that we provide so that those at the lower end of the economic spectrum receive the most help. So those who are now at the 0 to 100% on the federal poverty level, they receive the greatest discount from us through the EPR program. In addition to rate subsidies, we're also offering a much more holistic approach to assist those very same customers. We've ramped up our education and energy efficiency programs to help low-income customers to save energy and reduce their monthly bills. We're excited about an agreement that we recently signed with Grid Alternatives, a national nonprofit that specializes in making renewable energy technology and job training to the underserved communities. SMUD works with Grid Alternatives to identify EPR customers who might qualify for free solar electric systems. And the funds from the solar panels comes from the California Climate Investment, a statewide program that uses cap and trade dollars to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. SMUD also weatherized during that same time almost 200 homes and rental properties during the first half of 2017. The weatherization includes attic insulation, weather stripping, window replacement, and heating and ventilation and air conditioning controls. Additionally, we're working with community partners to provide energy education and to help customers lower and manage their energy bills. And now to the future. I mentioned the 70 years before, but we're not looking back. We're actually looking forward. The adage about an organization only being as strong as the people who work there has served SMUD well the first 70 years. But the influx of new technologies and the growth of distributed resources such as solar, wind, geothermal, and others in the industry make it truer now than it's ever been. we not only need to replace our engineers, our line workers, power generation experts and such, but we also need to recruit and hire new people, young people, people that are recently educated who can help us move the company forward. In 2016, SMUD initiated a Powering Futures scholarship program. This assists outstanding students in the SMUD service territory, and preference was given to students who are involved in STEM fields. 25 local students received college scholarships ranging up to $5,000. And this to me is more important probably than that, although not to those young people. But the scholarships also included internships at SMUD. So in addition to the scholarships, they have an opportunity to come into the company and actually work with the company. SMUD recently established a $250,000 endowment at Sacramento State and UC Davis to fund additional scholarships at the region's 2 main universities. We're hopeful that some of the bright young minds will wind up working at SMUD, and there's more to it than that. We're looking at the big picture, and as a community-owned utility, we support education because it's the right thing to do. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is something called our Shine Award. This is a community program that was developed, and whenever I look at it and I think about the acronym there or think about the word shine, I'm an old movie buff and a car collector, and when this award came out and the name came out, it reminded me of, I'm going to date myself, it reminded me of the movie The Karate Kid, in which Mr. Miyagi was telling the young student Daniel, wax on, wax off. And Daniel thought all he was doing was working, just providing labor to shine Mr. Miyagi's cars. And what he didn't realize is that what was actually going on was self-improvement. Our Shine program is a lot like that. In conjunction with our 70th year anniversary, we initiated this program, which is designed to improve and revitalize neighborhoods in the Sacramento region. Community grants ranging from $5,000 to $100,000 are available to any nonprofit organization in our service territory. They're all eligible to apply. We consider a broad range of projects for these scholarships, like neighborhood revitalization, STEM education, environmental and energy efficiency projects, greenhouse gas reduction, and general beautification of neighborhoods. The next thing I'll touch on is something that's near and dear to my heart, which is our small business program. As Aziza mentioned, I happen to lead that effort, and I've got a team of very talented people that are working for me and with me, and we're out in the community working to reach over 26,000 businesses to help them do what they do better. Our objective is to partner with our customers and provide guidance and expertise in helping them make the best energy choices for their businesses. This team of strategic advisors goes out and meets with our business customers. We provide information to them relative to account access that they can gain 24/7 on our website. We provide additional services and program information to them. We provide rebates and incentives. We partner with regional and community associations, business chambers, property business improvement districts, all with the goal of helping those very same customers. We offer customized billing options, which helps these customers to be able to pay their bill when they're best able to afford it, when they can budget that bill like they do a lot of their other services. We provide energy management solutions. those are the bones of what we do. That's the meat and potatoes of what we do. And there's a whole team of SMUD people that put a lot of that information together for me while I was flying around the country and around the world. And I appreciate that, I really do. I appreciate the work that they've put into it. And while there is a SMUD director here in the audience, I'm about to go off script. I'm about to go off the reservation. There's an old saying that if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears, does it make a sound? I submit to you that it's not enough to create policies and programs and services for the underserved communities if we don't get that information out to them. One of the things that I found in working with these 26,000 businesses is that they're far too busy running their businesses, keeping the doors open, keeping the lights on, keeping the bills paid. They're far too busy doing that to come visit me at SMUD to see what programs and services I have to offer. With that in mind, SMUD created the SMB team. And we go out, and it's our job to literally go out and knock on doors, to talk to people, to meet them where they are. We've got to do that. We've got to bring that, the information and the services that we have for them, we've got to bring them to them. And that includes even everyone else on this panel and those of you in the audience. It's not enough to sit by in our fancy offices with our suits and ties and fancy dresses and hope that these things get done. You see, in order to have impact, there's got to be a collision. We must move from the comfort of our offices, of the situations that we're in, and we've got to knock on the doors, we've got to shake the hands, we've got to meet the people at the point of their need. I was thinking about it this morning as I was drinking my third or fourth cup of coffee. And I was reminded that that strategy worked for Gandhi. Getting out there with the people. That strategy worked for Mother Teresa. Getting out there with the people. Got to get our hands dirty. Got to get out there on the streets. That strategy worked for Dr. Martin Luther King. And I've read somewhere that God is no respecter of persons. That means to me that if it worked for those folks, it'll work for me. It'll work for you. It'll work for all of us. At SMUD, we'll continue to partner with fantastic organizations like the Sacramento Black Chamber of Commerce to make Sacramento a more livable, more sustainable, more prosperous community for everyone. It's not easy. This is hard work. All of you are committed to it. This is hard work. But I'll leave you with this quote from another great hero of ours, Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Get out there and get it done. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Ted. So all of these pieces of the puzzle, I hope that they're beginning to fit for you. But there's one major piece that we haven't discussed that we're going to. And we can't get any of this work without having peace of mind in the communities in which we live. Public safety is so important. It is such an integral part of our living experiences. And without having that safety and that feeling of safety in your lives, it's going to make it very difficult for you to get all of the rest of that work done. Having said that, I want to introduce you to Chief Daniel Hahn. And I have an old bio of him because it talks about him being sworn in as a chief of police for the city of Roseville, which is somewhere near Sacramento. But he is actually our chief now in Sacramento, chief of police. The first African-American police chief in the city of Sacramento. And I am not only delighted about that, but I'm also delighted to call him my friend and also one of my ALF buddies, my American Leadership Forum buddies. Thank you for being with us today, Chief.
Thank you. So I'm standing up here because I'm not height challenged. I'm normal height, 6 feet. So for that, what that's worth. So I think I'll start with a little bit about myself because it forms everything I believe in what law enforcement is doing or should be doing and what I'm going to talk about today. So a little bit about myself. I was adopted at 3 months old by my mom and dad. Unfortunately, my dad died when I was 5. My sister, who's 4 years older than me, was born with hydrocephalus, and so she's both mentally and has mental and physical disabilities and is legally blind. I have 3 other brothers. When I was 9 years old, my older brother and myself were the only witnesses to a homicide that happened right in front of our house. For those of you that aren't from Sacramento, I grew up in a neighborhood called Oak Park that some might call a tough neighborhood. That's probably the kindest neighborhood name I've heard it called. So we had drug dealing, and we lived right on the stroll, so there's prostitutes in front of our house every day. So we witnessed, me and my brother and I were the only witnesses to a homicide where a guy got shot like 10 or 15 times in front of our house when I was about 9. When I was about 11 or 12, when I was in junior high, I had to testify to that in court, which was a little scary when you're 11 years old. When I was 16, I was arrested for assault on an officer in the living room of my home by the department that I'm chief of now. As a police officer in 1992, on March 7th, my mom's birthday, my younger brother was murdered in my beat on my shift while I was working, and I identified him. He had gotten involved in drugs, using drugs and selling drugs, and he got murdered as a result of that. And then at 19 years old, completely by accident, I had never dreamed of being a police officer, never even thought about being a police officer. I was going to college at the time. My degree is in business. At 19 years old, by accident, I went through the police academy. So I've been a police officer since I was 19. This month marks 30 years for me. So about 6.5 years ago, there was an opportunity that came up for me to go to Roseville from Sacramento as police chief, of which I resisted for about a month or 2, but obviously ultimately succumbed to that request. And I've been chief of police for Roseville for 6.5 years, and about a month and a half ago, the opportunity to come back home to my city where I was born and raised presented itself. So as Aziza said, a month and a half ago, I came back as the police chief. So that's a little bit of background with me. I wanted to kind of say why I'm speaking here today, and that's really, I believe everybody on this panel, and probably everybody in this audience, our job, our mission should really be to improve the quality of life for all people. That's what I think the mission of any police department is. And so it's with that framework that I'll say the things I'm going to say. So what is the issue when we talk about underrepresented communities in relation to law enforcement? Well, it's an issue that has been here since the inception of this country. There's never been a time in our country where every single neighborhood has felt valued and connected to law enforcement, whatever law enforcement looked like throughout the history of our country. I repeat that. There's never been a time where every neighborhood has felt that way. We need systemic change, not only in law enforcement, but in our community. We all have to come to the realization that we have to change the way we do certain things, fundamentally change those things, not nibble around the edges, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I'll give 2 examples of that. If you look at any recruitment video on most police departments, you're going to probably find things like smoke, people jumping out of trucks with guns, exciting stuff, pursuits, lights and sirens, and things like that. That doesn't always jive with what I just said our job is. Our job is to improve the quality of life of all people. And sometimes that requires jumping out of cars, and sometimes that requires chasing people. But 99% of the time, it doesn't require either one of those things. Yet our recruiting videos, who we recruit, are people that are looking for that. And so I say to you that if somebody is looking to become a police officer because they want to jump out of helicopters, chase people down the street, and run after people, don't get me wrong, those are fun things. Yeah. I've done all of them, they're fun. But if you're going into that profession because that's what you're looking for and you only get it like 1% of the time, you're probably not the happiest person in the world. The other thing is, we often see videos, I was going to start with this and I forgot all about it. My profession is not controversial at all. We never see anything on the news about law enforcement in the community, right? So we often, how many people have seen a video on the news where somebody has mental health problems, doesn't have, well, might have a weapon like a knife usually, and then gets shot and killed by the police department? Anybody seen videos like that? Okay. So we often give officers awards for that, if they were in danger, right? Or if somebody else was dangerous. So if the guy that's got in mental health crisis is charging at a police officer and they're in danger or charging at somebody else and the officer shoots them, in most places around this country, they will get an award for that. And I'm not saying they don't deserve an award for that. But we recently, so I often consider myself my mother's son, a community person, a father, those sort of things. And then after all those things, I consider myself a police officer. So I always think that I'm enlightened with the community and all that. Until about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, before I was back with Sac PD, there was an article that ran in our local paper that the title was, 2 police officers get an award, or something like, maybe not the exact words, but 2 police officers get an award for killing a mentally ill black man, which is true. That's what happened. Now, this guy was supposedly charging at him with a knife and all those scenarios I just told you. And when I read the title in the morning when I woke up, I thought, wow, that's not a good title. That's bad. That's really disturbing. Then I read the article and I realized to myself, if I hadn't have read the title, I wouldn't have seen anything wrong with that. Nothing. And I'm still not saying something's wrong with them getting an award for some of their actions that they did. But I realized that being a cop for 30 years has influenced my thinking to a certain extent. And I wondered, how could they not have anticipated that this would have been an issue? How could they have not anticipated this article title? Why? Because they're all cops, and they work with other cops. And so then I thought, we have several situations in my department in Roseville at the time where we had those exact same scenarios where the officers didn't shoot with a gun, but shot with some other type of tool, what we call 40 millimeter, which shoots like baton rounds, and nobody died. And I thought to myself, we haven't one time thought about giving them an award, even though it's the exact same scenario, except the guy lived. So next day I had a management meeting with all the managers, which was weekly, and I walked in, I go, who's giving this one an award and who's writing this person up for an award? Because we have to reward what we want to see. And I'm not saying the other reward is bad, but if we're only rewarding when somebody gets shot and killed, then why are they doing the other? So that's kind of a little bit of history that I wanted to share. We often, back to the video. So on those recruitment videos, you usually see those kind of action things. I ask you, if you have time, go on YouTube and look up Roseville, California, not Roseville, Minnesota, or Roseville, Michigan, or all the other Rosevilles that I used to get hit with when they did something wrong in Roseville, California. But Roseville, California's recruitment video. And you'll see we created a whole separate recruitment video that talked about adding value to the community, that talked about providing a service to the community, as opposed to all these, we put a little bit of action and almost all of this quality of life type stuff. And so that's a little bit of history. So I'm going to end on solutions. So how do we change this? How do we, I've given many talks to groups where I said, this generation and the next couple of generations, why don't we be the one that changes this thing for the first time ever? Why don't we be the ones that make sure that my 12 and 10-year-old daughter aren't having the same conversation that we're having on law enforcement, community relations, the healthiness of a community? Because when there's always going to be a problem when there's one neighborhood. I know our neighborhoods in Sacramento, so I don't know all the neighborhoods around California, but the wealthy, non-diverse neighborhood over here thinks one thing about a police department. Then you go to the neighborhood like I grew up in, and they think something else. It's the same police department, but 2 vastly different opinions on what. I think there's a Pew Research study that somebody just told me about yesterday, or 2 days ago back in Sacramento, where it surveyed community and it surveyed law enforcement. And their impressions or their feelings about law enforcement were the opposite. So the community felt law enforcement was X, law enforcement themselves thought that they were Y. I present to you that that's a problem. That's a major, major problem. And so how do we change that? How do we systemically change that? Well, I'll give you a couple other examples. Did you know that when somebody goes to the police academy, I went through when I was 19, never touched a gun in my life when I went to the academy. I still have never owned a gun. The only gun I've ever had is the one that the cities that I work for give me. I've never gone to a range outside of qualifying or training through the police department. I'm not a gun guy, right? So my roommate in the academy was 53 years old and had just spent 30 years in the military. Who do you think shoots better? He clearly shot better. He put every bullet through a hole like that. Mine were all over. Mine still are all over the place. They're in the silhouette, though, just so you know, in case you want to get funky. I might just hit you in the arm, but it's going to hurt. So Post is a governing body similar to what the bar is for lawyers or doctors have, where you have to be licensed to be a police officer. And that means you have to go through a licensed academy, and then every year you have to have so many hours like a teacher does to maintain your license, if you will. So Post in California does that. Most states have the same similar thing with their own rules. Well, Post mandates that you will be trained on something and then be tested on it, and if you fail that test, you will get one remediation. If you fail that remediation, you have to be kicked out of the academy. There's no choice. You have to. So I say to you, me and my roommate go through training for firearms, and let's say I flunked the test by one round, right? There's one hole missing. I threw off the target. That means I don't pass. They give me one remediation. Some academies immediately give it to you right there with no extra training. If I flunk that, I'm gone. You want to know the two things that people get kicked out of the academy most for? Firearms and driving. And I think both of those can be learned. Some people learn it quicker than others. So I just testified in front of the Post Commission asking them to change that rule and allow more time for people to pass those tests. Obviously, you have to pass. You have to be able to hit the target if you're going to be a police officer. But the academy is 6 months long. So why can't we give them more chances to test? And I also tell you who disproportionately gets booted out of the academy for those things. And so that's one thing we can do. The other thing is, when we go through backgrounds, when we put officers through, or potential officers through backgrounds, we look at everything from your grades in high school to your grades in college if you're in college, to your credit score. And guess what? If you have a bad credit score, you're gone. I ask you this, what does a bad credit score tell you? It doesn't tell me anything by itself. It tells me you might not be responsible. But then I have to do the rest of your background to see if you're irresponsible in other areas. If you're not, maybe you just made a bad decision 2 years ago that you're still recovering from. And more importantly, maybe you'd be a great cop. Maybe you'd be great at serving our community and improving the quality of life of everybody in our community. But instead, we kick you out for that. So we need to change things like that. The other thing is, we often, you get the wealthy, non-diverse neighborhood. Somebody grows up there, nothing wrong with that. You are a product of your experiences and your background, and great, you've had a good life that's not a diverse neighborhood. But oftentimes, that person then becomes a police officer, and the first place we put them, because that's where most of the officers are, in what we call, like a neighborhood where I grew up in Del Paso Heights, a tough neighborhood, right? And we wonder why there's issues. Well, that person's not even close to being ready to work in a community with a completely different culture than where they grew up, and different norms and different things like that. I've heard people tell me, let's move. I told people to keep safe. They always barbecue in their front yard in their neighborhood, and I told them to keep safe, move their barbecue to the backyard. I said, you didn't tell somebody to do that, did you? Yeah, I did. I go, you know what they were thinking. He's like, no, they're thinking, you're the cop, why can't you keep me safe in my front yard? Right? So it's those kind of things that me as chief has to create opportunities. It doesn't mean don't hire those folks. It means how do I create opportunities for them to get to know the neighborhoods and get to know, because in those neighborhoods, the cop goes from bad call to bad call to bad call and never meets like Miss Johnson on the corner. So how do we create opportunities for them to get to know? And one of those ways is, well, one of many ways is to do implicit bias training where we include the community, because I think that's probably the biggest issue we deal with in some of these shootings is implicit bias. Right. And then let me give you a couple other examples and I'll end. We have to work together. Every person up here talked about working together. We have to. So I think police officers are on the street in your everyday life probably the most powerful job anybody can have, because we are one of the few people that can take your freedom away which should probably be the most valuable thing to you, and we don't even have to be right. So if you resist me taking your freedom away and I'm wrong, that's a crime, you resisting me, even when I'm wrong. That's a crime, at least in California. I don't know somewhere else, but in California, that's a crime. I don't know any other jobs that can do that. We got a lot of power. And as we all probably know, diminishing or taking away or sharing a lot of power is tough. People don't like to do that. And it's also hard to get things through to people that have a lot of power. So, but some of that is the solution. We have to share and partner with other entities. And I'll give you some examples. Mental health people, right? First of all, we have to get better at responding to people in mental health crisis, right? How do we respond in a way that they don't die as a result of that, right? We have a lot of tools that we didn't have when I was a young officer. We have 40 millimeters that shoot batons. We have beanbag rounds from shotguns. We have tasers. We have all sorts of things that we can use in a lot of these cases that the person will still be taken into custody or whatever needs to be done with them, but they're alive. Right? So that's one side. How do we respond to these out on the street? How do the officers get better at responding? How does the community and the officers get better at that? But there's another side to that. We can do that every day. We can get better and keep shooting this guy with a baton round, right? But they're in mental health crisis. So sooner or later, they're going to hurt somebody, their neighbor, their family. We had a guy in Roseville that we went to 30 times in the span of a year, solely because of his mental health stuff. His mom, who he lived with, told him, he was 30-some years old. His mom told us, he's going to kill me one day, but he's my son, so I let him stay here. The neighbors were talking about moving, would no longer let their kids play outside because he would come outside and yell the craziest things, try to get in people's doors and everything. The community, the neighbors were not able to use their neighborhood the way they should. And the officers would leave those calls every time they went to him and say to themselves, something bad's going to happen here, but there's nothing I can do. He didn't break the law today. There's nothing I can do. And they'd leave. Sooner or later, something's bad. And so it got to my level, and I'm like, sooner or later, he's going to kill somebody or we're going to kill him. Neither one is good. What do we do about this? So the second half of that is how do we respond on an ongoing basis, right? And so we create a social services unit in Roseville that's run by a social worker that's employed by the police department. And we train officers in mental health, extensive training. And we create a caseload between social services, mental health, the police department, the police officers, that we put these repeat customers on a caseload that we check in with the family and them every month to try to keep them from spinning out of control into creating things like that. We didn't used to do stuff like that. But that's a partnership, right? We have to share power. We have to share information. We have to think of ourselves as more social. So if you talk to hardcore, traditional law enforcement people, they say that's not my job. My job is to arrest people, enforce the law, and protect people, and gosh darn it, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not doing none of that touchy-feely social work stuff, right? And my answer to them is, okay, then you'll just keep responding and responding and responding, and sooner or later you're going to shoot them or they're going to shoot somebody else, and now you're going to be in the paper with a lot of negative stuff. Do you want that? Well, no. Well, then let's think of a better way to do this. Second thing, homelessness, right? We can keep taking homeless people to jail all day long for illegal camping, whatever all they're doing, and sometimes they do need to go to jail, but the jails are full. They're not going to be held. They're going to be let back out. They know that. They're going to keep going back to what they're doing. There's a large percentage of homeless around this country, probably 60, 70, if not more %, that have drug issues and or mental health issues or both, right? So we can keep taking them. As long as I take that person to jail and they maintain their mental health problems and their drug issues, guess what? They're not finding housing. And we can create all the housing we want. They're not going to stay there because they have issues that haven't been dealt with. So we need to partner with social services on those things, housing, social services, jobs, and things like that to get people back up on their feet. Else we're going to keep going around in circle and around in circle. Again, we're not just here. We're not here. Our job isn't to arrest people. Part of how we improve quality of life is arresting people. We'll never get away from that. But we also need to think about partnering with people that can do these long-term things. Same with drugs, or gangs and violence. So we just created a new kind of anti-gang, anti-violence thing in Sacramento. And I don't know if it's going to work or not. It's called Advanced Peace. But I do know this. We have to do something different. Because if we look at violence in our neighborhoods as like a drug issue, like we need to rehab from it because it's a lifestyle, when you talk to people that are rehab specialists, they say relapse is part of rehab. right? 3, 4, 5 relapses are going to happen with most people as they rehab. That doesn't mean that you're not progressing. It just means you're going to have some relapse. If we look at violence the same way, we need to say, as we're trying to get people out of violence, they might commit some more crimes. And we can't just throw them out just because they did that. They need to be held accountable for that. But we have to keep working with them. We have to think of other ways other than just arresting people that are involved in behavior that damages our neighborhoods. And that's a big change for law enforcement. And we have to include the community into the police department and come up with some of these things. So in closing, I'd just like to say that along with what everybody else here said, the solution to this issue that we've always had with healthy communities, because that's stressful. To have to think about some of the things we think about in certain neighborhoods is stressful. I can't imagine it's healthy, right? Dr. Barrett would probably tell you that's very unhealthy, right? It's going to contribute to your high blood pressure and all those other things. And so I believe that improving this relationship and making a true partnership also helps with health, but it's only going to happen if we partnership and give up a little bit of our power to other people and truly change our mindset from arresting people to how do I help? What's the best thing I could do right now that helps my community, helps this neighborhood, and helps this family? Thank you.
Aren't we the lucky ones? I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists. You've been just amazing. And I hope that you see the larger picture that we've been trying to portray, is that we all have to work together to make our holistic communities whole and healthy, not only by physical health, but in mental health, emotional health, economic health. They all have to work together so that we can live good lives. I want to take a moment now to ask if there are any questions of any of the panelists. There is a microphone. A gentleman has a microphone here.
Yes, I do.
Would you state your name and also state the question that you have and for whom?
Hello, my name is Tanae Franklin, and my question, hi Jamal. My question is for both Jamal and Daniel. I'm wondering what opportunities, Jamal, I think I can probably see your brain moving. What opportunities are there to address social determinants of health, which obviously some of the solutions that were proposed by the police chief, what opportunities are there to intersect with the health equity work that you're doing?
We have out of our Office of Health Equity, we are investing $60 million into mental health disparities programs across the state. And what we are really excited about and very intentional about is the $60 million we're investing. We are intentionally investing in non-evidence-based programs, because what we're trying to do is lift up culturally congruent practices that are addressing mental health and trauma in our communities. Many of the programs that we're funding, we changed our procurement process at state government level to where many of our grantees are for the first time they're being funded with public dollars, because historically the procurement process obstructed them and they were disqualified when we think about policies that need to be changed. And the reason I say that, it's getting resources to communities that need them most allow us to affect real change. But some of the programs that we're partnering with, they are addressing issues with regard to boys and men of color, girls of color, how trauma and ACEs have impacted our communities, and they're partnering with local county and city services such as law enforcement, and kind of having a collective impact approach as to how we address mental health, stigma in our communities. So that's one of the levers that we're trying to mainstream with regard to state government, is using our mental health dollars to invest and uplift programs that are being innovative and addressing real, health and human service needs in our community, but really changing systems and fostering new collaboratives and new efforts. And we're one of probably the only state departments of public health investing in these types of collaboratives on the local level. So that's one example of how we are reaching outside of the walls of health to work with critical community-based services to address real sustainable change.
Daniel?
Yeah, I agree with that completely, because what we normally do is nibble around the edges, and I meant to say this and I forgot, but like the things we usually talk about, whether it's dealing with somebody in mental health crisis or just dealing with neighborhoods that are challenged or underrepresented, is our solutions nationwide are typically body cameras and commissions. And so I say to you to think about it in this way. When you think of body cameras, how do you even know about all of these situations typically that happen between law enforcement and the community? It's typically on a cop's body camera. So clearly that didn't prevent it, and if that's the goal. And then secondly, a lot of the cities we hear about in the media having these issues have had commissions forever. So I present to you that that too is not necessarily the whole solution. I think both are good ideas. I think they both help with transparency. I do not think neither one of them should not be done. I'm just saying if that's all we do, we will be here, our kids will still be talking about this. So we need to, and they're both reactionary, and they're both after the fact, and they still don't both address the issue. If the issue is an officer that shouldn't be an officer, so yeah, you catch him after he does something wrong, but you didn't prevent him from being an officer. And so I think what was just set up here is really the solution. We have to systemically look at how do we get better at delivering services? How do we get better at interacting with the community? How do we get better at building trust and doing good things in our community instead of these negative things happening? Because every once in a while they're going to happen anyway, because just sometimes stuff happens. But I also think there's a ton that could be prevented if we did things differently.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Charlene Mack. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm operating public. But I work for an organization called Leadership for Educational Equity, where I manage a National Community Organizing Fellowship. And a few things that we teach is, one, that Chief Hahn talked about, that one, that power is not zero sum. And two, that in order to move towards organized people, yes, we have a strong private and public sector, but how do we create an equally strong civic sector to operate in true democracy? So I'm curious, for all of your roles, I hear a lot of private and public partnerships. What civic partnerships are happening, and not in a way of like financial distribution, but equal playing fields, equal voices, and utilizing the power to organize people?
Is that your height challenge? You want to talk about that?
Now my nickname is Height Challenge. That's good. So look, yeah, public-private is a big thing, right? But part of that collaboration and connecting and those 4 C's that lifted out is important to walk back into the community and look at the organizations that are actually doing stuff. And in my role, it's about connection. So if I can connect the dots between what this organization and this community is doing to this over here, but then add on top of that what I see coming from the private and public sector. A perfect example, I always go back to this autonomous car thing. Del Paso Heights that you heard Chief Hahn talk about before, historically disadvantaged, primarily Black community. The only time I used to go out to Del Paso Heights is to play against Grant High School in basketball. That was the only reason I would ever go out there. Now, different perspective, I'm meeting with organizations that are actually doing stuff for the community out there, talking to them about the possibility of bringing new technology companies to bear and how to make sure the community is integrated into that conversation. Let's talk about how do we get the kids, workforce internship opportunities with these tech companies. And then I find out, well, it's a readiness issue. Okay, well, let me go talk to the university that has free counseling and get them into there so that we can actually start addressing those systemic issues that are in our population. But it's all about connecting now. If we don't start connecting the dots, we're going to keep getting left behind. It's as simple as that. But all the stuff that everybody's talked to, it's all about connection. It's all about communication, and we just got to be better at it.
And I'd like to address that as well. As the president and CEO for the Sacramento Black Chamber of Commerce, it really is a role of a Chamber of Commerce. And I haven't even taken the time to put in a shameless plug for Chambers of Commerce. And I should very quickly. We're running out of time, and I don't want to take the time away from others that have questions, but use your chambers of commerce not only for the economic development piece, but for the connectiveness. We brought this program to you because of all of the different interests that some of our members have. We are member-driven, but each of our members has a specific interest in which they're looking to get answers, and they're looking for partners. Your chambers of commerce can really play that role in bringing it together. If it hadn't been for the chambers of commerce, this panel would not be here. So check out your chambers of commerce.
Can I just quickly add to that as well? If you think of every public institution that we interface with, from school to our churches to banks, many of these systems and institutions have historically let us down, and it's tied to our disenfranchisement. So if you take school, my first introduction to any public setting was school. And if you look at schools where 18% of our children across the country are African American are preschoolers, but 48% of the one-day school suspensions in preschool, when we think about educational attainment as a determinant of equity, 48% of those kids being kicked out of school at preschool. So that disrupts so much. Not only will they likely grow up to be unhealthy, but that disrupts the future of innovation and workforce development. And if you take schools and these other major institutions, it's like there's literally, like, we have reason to be discouraged. And if you think about Hamilton, we got to be in the room where it happens. So a lot of times we're in the lonely space, but we need to look at succession planning, to build that pipeline, and that is key to sustainability. But the disruption starts literally when we're born. So it's not a reason or an excuse for us not to be engaged from a civic standpoint, but there literally is disenfranchisement that is taking place that we need to address so we can restore, rebuild, and kind of reconcile wrongs that have really stifled the pipeline of us being the leaders and having more, of a prolific impact and presence in public and private sector.
I have time probably for one or two more questions. This gentleman right here. Oh, you're over here. Okay.
Further elaborate on the advanced piece of issues that you spoke of. How does that work?
Yeah, again, I don't know if the advanced piece is going to work or not, but advanced piece was started in Richmond. I think if you Google it, there's a Nightline show and things like that on it. But it basically puts mentors, if you will, that are ex-cons, people that have done time that are now older and done with that, as mentors for these young men. And then they set goals like get your GED, get a driver's license, or whatever that individual young man needs. And then eventually they can start getting paid for that. So over about a 1.5 year period of time, they can make up to $12,000 if they hit every one of their goals. And so again, I guarantee it won't be 100% successful. It might not even be 1% successful. But the reason why I testified in front of council that I was in support of trying it is because we need to try new things and we need to see if that works. And so that's basically the program that's trying to help people get out of that lifestyle. And so they bring half the funding, and the city provided $1.5 million. So it's $3 million over, I guess technically it's 4 years, 3 years supposedly. So measurement's a big deal, I think. So we can see if it's working, and if it's not, let's stop doing it. Let's stop wasting money. But it's another way of how do we, and then so one of the controversial things is paying. So a lot of people say, well, it's back the same thing that prisons used to have. Why are we paying these people that are involved in violent acts or criminal activity instead of giving that money to young people that are doing well? And the prisons used to have that too. Why are we providing college credits and college educations to people in prison when people out here didn't do anything wrong and they're struggling to pay for college? My answer to that is, okay, then when they get out, because they all get out, then they will be worse than they were when they went in. And so is that what we want in our community? So yeah, everybody's right, but it's what do we do? So same thing. So one is the money, and then the other one is if they do commit a crime, not a violent crime, because if they committed a violent crime, they'll go to prison for a while. But if they committed a crime and then got out 2 weeks later, should they be kicked out of the program? My answer to that is no, because it's like rehab. They're going to have relapses. That's their lifestyle. And so if they're progressing, let's keep them in it and just know that sometimes they're going to relapse, if you will. So,
This gentleman back here.
Thank you. My name is Ruben Agbana, and I'm an educator, super passionate about STEM and all things technology. So Lewis here, passion for pipelines that get the kids in early is something I'm super excited about. But oftentimes I feel like the train has left the station and companies are getting started, launched, and funded every day. And sometimes those pipelines with young kids don't pay off until 12, 20 years later. How is your office thinking about training the current workforce, especially as jobs are being displaced right now?
So fantastic question. So the mayor's office actually has a program called 1,000 Strong. And so they're actually trying to get 1,000 youth, underserved, underrepresented primarily, into full year-round paid internships. To date, they've placed about 200 kids or students, young people. I don't know what whatever. Yeah, I call everybody kids now. But and so they've had limited success. So as Chief Han, I'm going to adopt this language. I present to you that that's a good start to entry points. But it actually needs to start sooner, right? So you have to actually truly think about K through 12, and then kind of beyond, so that in the STEM field, especially, most minorities drop out of STEM education by their sophomore year in college. So then you don't have the engineers, you don't have the scientists, you don't have whatever. And so if you actually, part of what I did at the state, for instance, that I need to start doing at the city, is essentially taking field trips for adults. But then at the same time, I do what I do for my kids and kids that look like my kids. So if I could get a bunch of kids together to go with me and tour a facility so they can actually see and they can actually hear what the speak is and start learning the language of entrepreneurship and innovation, completely different. I don't know if entrepreneurship can be taught, per se. I know there's a lot of classes, but it's kind of in you. You're going to know if you have that ability and that drive. But in STEM, if you don't completely understand how what you're learning is connected to what you do later on, that starts early. And parents, you guys, make your kids sit down, get the phones away from them, make them do something good. My daughter hates my guts. I just cut off her data plan. But I'm trying, but I'm trying to get her to understand that sitting there texting her friends while she should be doing her math isn't going to benefit her in the long run. And so then I drag her into another company. Hey, come see what these people are doing. Her eyes brighten up, she gets going again, and then she starts texting again. Anyway, it's a vicious cycle, but you got to keep trudging. And yeah, it does seem like the train has left a lot of times, but that's why I say listen to those whispers. Start looking around and hearing what folks are talking about. I right now would tell you guys, start looking at a company called Reviver MX. It's a black-owned company he lives in Sacramento but works out of the Bay. Digital electronic license plates. He's about to be in the mix as far as autonomous cars, as far as just how people talk to cars. You're raising your hand. You want to know what I said?
The name of the company.
Can we make it quick? We need to make it pretty quick. We're really out of time.
Reviver MX is the company. Their website is Reviver Auto. Yeah, Reviver Auto.
Reviver MX.
Yeah, Reviver MX. The gentleman's name is Neville Boston.
He's got that Barry White voice. You can't understand.
I can't see.
I wish we had more time.
He's singing.
Okay, this young lady right over here, this is the last question.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Nisha Gaston. I'm from Los Angeles, California, but I attend school in North Carolina, in Greensboro, North Carolina, at Bennett College for Women. It is an HBCU that's all for women. Mostly minorities, women of color. My question to each of you, because we have a large population of students that go to HBCUs, but we are not from the South or from the West Coast or from the Midwest.
our foot in the door, and so you will see someone like me or Bryce who will kick a door even though it's not our field. And I'm a business major, and I'm usually the underdog because I'm a business major who's from Los Angeles, trying to talk to some Southern belles and gentlemen about business. So it's a whole other language. So if you could just
We'll make
grab
sure.
business cards.
We will absolutely make sure that we
Thank
give
you
you our
so
business
much.
cards. And I want to just take this opportunity to thank you all very much for coming and spending the last 2 hours with us. I hope it's been very helpful. I hope that it's been really helpful. I want to also thank all of our sponsors who help us to put this on. There's no way that we could do this without them. So I want to thank first and foremost SMUD, who has always been at the table with us, always. And this young lady that's sitting right here, who's been very quiet, who has always behind the scenes, don't get it twisted. She's going to be in front of the scenes pretty soon. But right now, she runs a company called Brand.gov. I want to thank you very much, Patrice, for all that you've done to support this effort for many years. And of course, Jamal with the State Department of Health Equity, thank you so much for being with us. And this is like your 3rd year with us, I believe.
Yeah.
3rd year. Thank you so much for being here. The city of Sacramento, I probably wouldn't have a job. I should probably have an office in the city. I spend as much time over there as I do in my own, but thank you guys very much again. And there were a couple of others. McDonald's has been very helpful with us. Of course, WellSpace, thank you so very much, Janine, Dr. Barra, for being with us today. And of course, our police chief, thank you, Daniel. I have a couple of board members here that I might want to mention too. Lori, would you stand? You've been behind the scenes as well, but thank you for all of the help that you've given. I share a staff member with SMUD who's standing in the back there, Sam Starks. You can't hide. Thank you. And a former board member, Harvey, who's with AT&T, Harvey Livingston. Thanks for being here today. Good to see you. Thank you all very much, and we hope to come back with more information for you next year. Look out for us. The name of our program is Prosper. We want you all to be that way.